Welcome everyone. In this slideshow I'll be showing you how I restored the doors on my 1949 AC 2 litre. Have you ever shut a luxury classic car door and been so impressed that you opened it and closed it again? These doors are in the same class. Sounds crazy until you try it. If you have followed the bodywork restoration of my AC, you might think that the doors are just scaled down versions of the main ash frame body. It would be boring if it was that simple. There are a couple of problems that made the doors a major challenge. The first problem is that removing the panelling is not really an option. Observe how it is folded 180 degrees over the edge strips. Admittedly, you would only need to unfold it about 90 degrees, but the original hand forming will have work hardened the alloy, especially where it goes around some very tight bends. It also gets more complex and delicate around the quarter light. It had cracked at the edges in one or two places, presumably during manufacture. The second big challenge I ran into I'll describe a little later. Firstly, a quick look at the door design. They are very heavy, but after you remove the windows and all metal fittings, that weight drops about 50%. The quarter lights operate via a neat little gear control. There's an aluminium gutter to stop rainwater dripping into the door pocket down below. Water drainage at the bottom looks straightforward enough, with a channel feeding 3 drain holes, but there's a slight blunder in how the panelling was fitted. As you can see, the bottom panelling was pushed into the holes from underneath. Thus any water draining down will be caught on top of the panel and trapped against the wood. In AC's defence, AC historians state that panelling was done by subcontractors. Water can also run into the rear corner, which is the lowest point in the door. These are all issues that are easily resolved. You can see a diagonal strip of steel. It was common practice in coach building to have a steel strip or maybe an adjustable rod to ensure that the door does not sag. The good design of this wood frame makes this one almost superfluous, and there was no tension at all in this strip, but I decided to put a little bit of tension in it after restoring. The black coating inside the doors is bitumen, which was often used for sound insulation in cars up to the 1950s. I removed all of this. For the wood I used an expensive German aluminium oxide paper, which didn't wear out fast or fall apart. This useful sandpaper was discontinued as soon as I discovered it. I stripped off the cellulose paintwork. Now to look at the problems with my right hand door. Woodworm had virtually destroyed the entire lower regions of the door frame and was starting to munch through the upper regions too. The lower part of the frame would have to be renewed. I managed to unfold the panel edge sufficiently so that the bottom panels could be removed. And here lies the second big problem. With the panel edges sticking out, I could not do any test fitting of the door as I progressed through the repairs. I had to rely on measurements from the doorstep and a cardboard template. It was a one-shot deal as I had to get it right first go. The final fit would be the test fit. The first wooden part to fail is this length of plywood. The rail alongside it was also destroyed. Here's the hidden side of it. The new plywood takes shape. I cut the new rail with a handheld circular saw, but only cut to about 80% depth and hand cut the rest. A new block for the corner. The base of the door pocket is a thin piece of plywood nailed down. Removing it revealed the level of damage, looking more like sand dunes. Some rot at the rear corner. With the bottom fork-shaped assembly removed, you can see the aluminium strip for the door closure. Next I made small repairs at the ends of the pillars. The new bottom rail takes shape. Checked against the plywood. The lower edge of the door is curved, and in fact this rail and plywood are slightly curved in the horizontal plane too. It's hard to find any straight edges. The angle of the forks needs to be precise, so I made a jig for the front end to set the width and adjusted the joint of the two components accordingly. Here it is being test fitted. As you can see, I made a chunky looking corner piece to make the join, as the original screws were inserted from the outside before the panel went on. This joint at the back of the door pocket needed minor repairs. The original screw fixing it down was a tiny number 6 gauge item, so I replaced it with a number 10 gauge screw. At this point I'll show you that I took the opportunity to reprofile part of the door's lower edge. If you look at this photo of the door on the car, that slight shadow shows that its lateral profile did not match the doorstep. It is the original door, as the body numbers match. Having made new woodwork, I decided to correct this error, although it would mean some panel beating too. I made a cardboard template for the doorstep. I altered the aluminium edge strip accordingly. Next, a new plywood base for the door pocket, which I screwed and glued down. The panelling prevented me from screwing this small pillar onto the side of the bottom rail. I therefore made this block, which I cut into a bridge, allowing rainwater to flow under it along the drainage channel. Sounds almost romantic. Before I could glue in all the new timber, I needed to anneal the edge of the panel. As with the body shell, I applied soap from a bar of simple soap and heated until the soap turned black. I used that flat sheet of aluminium to reflect the heat back. I also annealed the area of the panel that I was going to alter at the double bend. I then carefully panel beat it with a hammer against scraps of wood until it matched my template of the doorstep. It was important to glue that side rail to the plywood, with the parts adopting the slight curvature I mentioned earlier. There's enough springiness in the timber to curve them individually, but after gluing together, like a big laminate, they become pretty solid. The side rail originally had screws inserted from the inside of the door, doubtless done as a prefabrication, but I decided to insert them from the outside to make any future repairs easier. You can see that I tend to spread adhesive over the plywood edges to seal them in. There's the extra wedge-shaped piece I added in the rear corner to stop water pooling there. Moving our attention to the top, there's a large plywood member which is curved as viewed from above. Woodworm had attacked it, but there is limited access to attempt to replace it. I decided it was sufficiently intact to repair by injecting adhesive into the wormholes. This plywood is only 1/4 of an inch, 6 mm or so thick. The main area to repair was just below the quarter light window. More woodworm damage. Also, there were several small components at the window's lower edge that had been glued on with no other fixings and had long since come loose, including a shallow packing piece on top that the panel had pulled up, cracking the panel in the process. This would be easy to glue down now we have waterproof adhesives. Fortunately, no rot found in this area. You can never have too many clamps. The next stage was to apply aluminium based primer and 1 part polyurethane top coat. I almost overlooked this damaged wooden gusset at the top of the door pocket. The panels can go back on underneath with clear wax oil to seal them in and panel pins to hold them on. I had already enlarged the 3 drainage holes in the panel to allow the water to actually drain out. The diagonal strip went back on, only this time I positioned the lower bolt hole to give a small amount of tension. Remember that steel reinforcements and wood frames are usually about stiffness rather than strength. Wood is springy, and the sheer weight of the door plus someone leaning on it might cause some flexing. It's the same for the B-pillar on the main bodywork, which has a steel bracket to stop it from leaning outwards when the door is open. There is also this large section of wood which does not glue on as it needs to be detachable. It carries the window winder mechanism. It's the closest we get to a side impact beam. I'm sure you are on the edge of your seat, desperate to know if the door fits the car after what was 200 hours of work. That bottom profile is looking much better than before. I aim for 2mm clearance all round. Looks perfect at the rear corner. A bigger gap at the top, but I can reduce that. The quirky feature of the AC's doors is the roller under the front end. It originally had a rubber tyre or tube over that spindle. AC were anticipating that the door will sag and scrape the doorstep. It is rare to find an AC doorstep plate that has not got scrape marks. The rubbers disappeared quickly and the metal part ends up scraping the doorstep. Sometimes the answer is as simple as tightening the hinge bolts. You can also shim the lower hinge recess to raise the front of the door. There's a plywood packing piece above the roller, and I prefer to make it thin enough so that the roller casting is flush with the door underside. You can't get the old spindle out, so I've experimented by making a tyre from a split piece of fuel hose, and so far it works. But it will still wear away the chrome on the step plate, so it's best to keep the door high enough to avoid any contact. A nice detail touch is the thick leather restraining strap. This not only limits the opening of the door, but also acts as a damper, so the door does not swing fast even on a breezy day. Very handy if you are working on the car and don't want the door slamming against you. The left-hand door was a much easier project. Here it is prior to restoring, still covered in bitumen. You can see the various pieces of original trim and seals, quite different from more modern classics. The main task was to renew the lower section of plywood, plus some small repairs. That bottom rail looks like mahogany. I added that wedge at the rear of this door too. Minimal repairs near the top. Here's that separate piece for the window mechanism. You can see some waxproof paper that went under the quarter light to protect the little gearbox. A repaint and the diagonal black tie to finish. I also tackled the windows. There's a common problem on ACs with this window frame. With the door closed, the frame does not align with the fixed window frame behind it, leaving a gap at the upper corner. The frame slides into deep slots in the door, and there is some scope for adjusting the slope angle of the window. However, the quarter lights tend to fix its position at the front, and you obviously can't twist the glass pane, so I could only make a small improvement. Adjusting the fixed windows on the main body is not an option because it would go out of alignment with the edge of the roof. Moving to the window mechanism, these are quick action window winders that are very nicely engineered. They needed almost no attention apart from painting a few parts. The one difficulty was removing the glass from the groove or runner that holds the bottom edge. There is a thin rubber seal and it had effectively glued the glass to the steel. I added solvent cleaner to dissolve the ancient rubber and cut away the rubber with the craft knife. Even the steel runner was date stamped. I pressed the window back in after making a new rubber seal. It tended to pop out again, but eventually got the message and stayed put. And very nice it looked once finished. In the sliding runner I tried some synthetic grease containing PTFE. At first the window was binding. The thickness of the paint I'd applied to the woodwork had made it a tighter fit, but after some fettling the window could drop gently under its weight against the spring. Simply removing and installing this drop window needs some care. Like all windows on old British classics, it is tempered safety glass. That means it's been heat treated so that the outer surface is under tension and the inner part is compressed. All that stored energy gets released explosively if you break it. That's okay when it's confined by a window frame. My American friends should note that the Brits did not change to laminated windscreens until much later than North America, with tempered glass screens still common up to the 1970s. I once saw an American resto program where they tried to drill a hole in the screen glass after removing it from the frame. The screen exploded. The drop glass on the AC is quite heavy. Once you remove the winder mechanism, you can remove some of the screws holding the frame to the door. Other screws are hidden by the glass. While holding the glass carefully, you can pull out the front part of the frame, then tug it downwards to release it from the top of the quarter light. The frame can then be opened outwards a tiny amount, which is enough to release the glass. The rest of the frame screws are then revealed when you pull out the felt channeling. The mechanism for the quarter lights also needed nothing more than lubrication and painting, although it was originally zinc plated. The door latch is also an over-engineered piece of solid British craftsmanship, except that is for this component. For some reason they used a soft zinc alloy, and that is why the door handles droop. The square becomes distorted. Rather than try to dismantle the whole thing, I've tried a makeshift repair. I filed out the square hole and made a brass packing piece. There was still the boot lid and spare wheel door to sort out, but these were in really good condition. The only rot I found was around some hinge screw holes under the boot lid. I made ash dowels, glued them in and drilled them. The one issue on the boot lid was where the handle spindle passes through. You can see splits in the wood. I glued in some wedges and trimmed them off, then added an aluminium reinforcement where it won't snag against the lock mechanism. After stripping the paint off, I noticed a couple of very slight creases. I believe my dad had caused these. Before I was born, the AC suffered 2 punctures during a family holiday. After that, Dad always carried a second spare tyre, minus its wheel, which he strapped against the boot lid. This pressed the panel down in 2 places, creasing it over the wood frame. As you can see, I got its old curve back. On the spare wheel door, the backlit number plate was a much bigger task than you'd expect, but I'll leave that for another video. The door itself just needed some loose parts gluing together. Most of the work on this door goes under the heading of coach painting. Here's a sneak preview. That's all that I'll cover in this video. You'll appreciate that there is a lot more bodywork still to look at, from floor panels to the wings. Before I completed the body, I wanted to get the chassis repainted, the chassis being totally solid. I'll take a look at that in the next video, which means dealing with the topic of protective paints. Fascinating if you are a dedicated owner or restorer, but a cure for insomnia if you're just a casual observer of vintage cars. Thanks for watching.